Hi, and welcome. Let's talk sci-fi. Today I have with me author Sheila Jenné. Welcome, Sheila.
Thanks.
So, Sheila, you have a new debut novel, and it sounds just amazing. Black Sails to Forward. But before we get to it, I'd like to read a bit about your bio. Oh, there it is. How gorgeous. Oh, I love it. Such a cool design. So by day, you write financial advice, and by night, you parent a large neurodiverse family. In stolen minutes, you watch Star Trek, relatable. Weave on a homemade loom. That's amazing. I used to weave when I was a kid and get lost in the woods on purpose. Done that too. And your short fiction has been published in Little Blue Marble. Congrats. So, congrats again on your 2023 debut, Black Sails to Forward. And I'm
Fun
going to
word.
read a little bit about that, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
In a world of frock coats, solar sails, and rigid class boundaries, Lucy joins the Martian Imperial Navy as a midshipman. Mars and Earth are at war, and Lucy hopes for a quick promotion. But when she arrives on board ship, she finds her childhood ex-friend Moira already there. Class differences got in the way of their budding romance 5 years ago, and both of them are nursing grudges. Those same class differences are threatening the ship as the enlisted spacers threaten a mutiny and Lucy is forced to support the abusive officers. When Moira becomes a pirate, taking Lucy captive, the tables are turned. Lucy now has to rely on her enemy for her life. Her oath as an officer forbids her from helping the pirates, but it's becoming obvious that the Martian Empire doesn't deserve her loyalty. If she throws in her lot with the pirates, her family is doomed to poverty, but it could give her a chance to reconcile with Moira and claim the love she rejected so long ago. Sounds absolutely delightful and such a unique premise. I love that it's got that sort of hornblower and space thing going on. Just brilliant. So let's dive in. And I'd love to know, like, when did you first know you wanted to write science fiction?
Oh boy. When I was a kid, my mom loved to write. So my brother and I both wrote stories, but he was the science fiction guy and I was the fantasy person, right? Because I had this impression that science fiction was for boys. And he very much claimed the whole concept of being intelligent and being into science and
Ah,
being able to write those things. And I was intimidated. I felt like this is something that I couldn't do because I was just, the kid sister. I was never going to succeed at that. But I guess when I got older, I was like, you know what? I'm a grown up now and he can't stop me.
yeah,
And I think it's easy to get intimidated by science fiction because you think you have to be some kind of, science doctorate or something to write it. But you really don't. With the internet now, you can find out pretty much anything you want to know. And a lot of it is not about the science, it's about the characters.
exactly.
So if you understand characters, you can look up the rest. And I
Yes.
haven't found it all that difficult, even though I'm just an English major to find out how these things work, what the developments are, what it's like to live in space. All of that's available. So,
Okay.
it's been fun. This is whew, the third or fourth science fiction book that I've written,
Okay.
but the first one obviously to be published.
Fantastic. Well, congrats again on that. And so, who would you say, or TV shows and books, what were some of your greatest influences when you were
Well, Star Trek,
uh
obviously. I One of my earliest memories is watching Next Generation. I think I was 2 when it, came out, and I watched it every Saturday night my entire childhood. I watched Deep Space Nine after that, I watched Voyager. So we're like a Trek family.
I love
Watched all the movies in the theater, everything. So that's the biggest one probably. Obviously, I've read, a lot of Star Trek books. Then I read Isaac Asimov. I loved Anne McCaffrey, just loved her.
yes. Yes.
She was a big influence. And then my favorite of all time is Lois McMaster Bujold. I love how she really gets into the characters. It's not just pew pew lasers, like there are the lasers and I enjoy them, but also the development of the characters. She loves to take a character, kick that person in the teeth, and like, what's the worst thing that could ever happen to this person? That thing happens, and then the rest of the book is just slogging upward as they put their life back together. I really enjoy that.
Right. So I'm on the same page of, the characters. If you don't have the characters, it doesn't matter how incredible the setting or what the plot
Yeah.
is, if you don't care about those characters, it kind of doesn't matter. So,
Hmm.
just curious, you mentioned that you're an English major, and I wondered how much of that do you think played into your writing, just generally, regardless of genre?
Yeah. Well, the one thing an English major will teach you is how to crank out massive quantities of words in a very short time.
Very
I
true.
once wrote a 20-page paper the morning it was due. I
I've
didn't even,
never done this.
I think I started that morning and then I wrote it in class for another class and turned it in at 1 in the afternoon. 20 pages. And I got an A. So
Awesome.
like you kind of get to the point where you're like, I can, if you know the material, you can just sit down and write it.
Right.
And it's also made me an incredible stickler about commas, which is more of a flaw than anything else, because I can be like, you changed my comma, put the commas back where I put them. But and then, of course, just reading massive quantities of literature, seeing how different authors deal with character, deal with themes. We read a lot of Jane Austen, which I think you can really see in my book.
Yeah.
It begins with a very Austen-esque scene
Love it.
because this world that I've created is very classist, it's very formal. And so you have this failed proposal of like, but I want your money, so you should marry me. And that blows up, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's a fun thing because Jane Austen is a great thing to read as an English major because it's like, okay, I'm getting school credit for this, but it's also just a really fun book to
It's
read.
fun. Yep. Correct. Yeah. And I love any of that era as books, because for one thing, like I love science fiction, I love fantasy, I love horror, but I have read a lot of literature and books from that era, and they're just a ton of fun. And it's of course we go back to those wells because they're timeless and there's something universal and appealing about them, right? And you can take that sort of vibe and thread it through whatever genre you want to write in. I just love that you've done that with this. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
Would you say that, like, talking about writing and being an English major and commas, do you think that that makes you a stronger editor of your own work, or do you feel that you need to step back more?
I I think I've done more editing on my book than anybody else has. I've gotten a lot of useful feedback from other people, but I get my drafts really clean before anyone else is allowed to look at them because I'm like, no, I need this scene to be punchy and I need the beats to hit where I want them to hit. And I'm I am far pickier and more demanding than anybody has ever been able to see my work with the same amount of demandingness. So I'm like, no, it has to be perfect. And so by the time the editor gets it, they're like, you used this word twice in the same paragraph. I'm like, okay, thanks. That's the kind of stuff I can't see myself. But
Right,
in
right,
terms of the structure, I'm pretty picky.
yeah. Structure is a big deal, but like, curious your approach to world building. How do you build a world? You've already got the framework of a strong
Mhm.
English language, powerful command of it, being an English major, being a strong editor of your own work, but building the world. What's your approach for that?
Oh man, this is my favorite part. I love world building. So I had in my mind what I wanted. Like I wanted it to feel like Master and Commander or Pirates of the Caribbean. I wanted it to feel very harsh and difficult, and I wanted the feeling of okay, we're light years from land, say, and we are you know, in the dark. There's nobody to help us. We have only the food we brought. The food is bad. We're uncomfortable. There's going to be interpersonal conflicts on the ship. And then I'm like, how do I make that happen in a science fiction universe? Because obviously, if they can just like light speed out of there, you won't have that experience. So I actually have it in this world. There's no electricity.
Hmm,
It's been banned. So they have high tech things, but not electric things. And
yeah.
that has really limited what's possible. So there's no gravity. Um, they fight with swords for various reasons, mainly because I wanted to. But
That,
I spent a lot of time thinking, like, what limitations can we put in place that will make the aesthetic turn out the way that I want?
yeah.
So I gave them a lot of backstory. I gave them historical reasons for why they're doing what amounts to what feels like a cosplay or a historical reenactment all the time with their clothes and everything. But it's like, no, this is how they have built their empire. Is they're trying to bring back a sense of a vanished past. which is what I'm trying to do. So
I
by
yeah.
combining those things, I was able to come up with something that really is very scientifically accurate and does make at least some amount of historical sense. But the guiding star was always the vibe. I wanted the vibe to happen.
Yeah, and I absolutely identify with that. I was just talking to my husband Gareth about it. We both write science fiction and other genres, but saying that, when I approach a new story, there's often a particular vibe, and sometimes feeling that vibe, I'm either have watched something or listened to something and then felt it and wanted to channel it, distill it into that story and how that made me feel. So I really like talking about your process and your approach to it. That's pretty cool. So when you were approaching this particular story, you've built out this world, you've got your characters, what are your favorite conflicts that are in the science fiction setting? You've mentioned that there's the society itself, there are
Mhm.
limitations to that, like there's a caste system, right? There's a social construct that is challenging. But I want to talk honestly, though, really about the pirates.
Yes, we always like the pirates.
Yeah. So let's dig into the pirates and like what do you love about pirates and why make space pirates, for example?
Well, I don't think you can really understand pirates unless you understand the Navy of the time, because if you were at sea, even if you were a merchant sailor, the Navy could basically kidnap you at any time and force you onto a Navy ship.
Yeah.
And there would be beatings, and there's a lot of strictness. You couldn't be gay, you couldn't be a woman, a lot of limitations. And it's no wonder that people would say, well, I don't want that. I want something else.
Right.
And piracy was the method that they had, especially if they couldn't make a living in some other way. It was like, well, we could steal other people's ships. And some of them were more privateers. They're working for one country. Some are straight up independent operators who preyed on everyone. There were times when they built their own pirate republics. It's a whole lot of interesting history there, and I just love them because uh, they're not the good guys of history. I don't believe history has good guys, but the rebellion against an unjust structure is always something that I enjoy. These are people who are pushing back against something that was really genuinely very bad. Um, and they had their own flaws, obviously, but I gotta side with the underdog. I gotta side with the
Yeah.
rebel. I can't not, especially in our modern society, which has so many problems coming down from the top. You
Right.
always want to just side with whatever's coming up from the bottom and say, how can we change things? How can we
Yeah.
change things for ourselves personally? How can we change things for everybody?
Right. Revolution begins lower down the road, not
Yeah.
So, I find that a really fun environment to read, but I'm also curious, you've got sort of the space opera, the pirate vibe. And I'm curious, what other sci-fi genre subgenres do you enjoy?
Ooh, I like them all. What I like most is the impossible to define. The stuff that you didn't think of before you picked up the book, and it's some really cool idea. I loved Embassy Town, where these aliens that they have two mouths and both mouths talk at once, and very few people can like translate that for them at all, and they can't lie. And it's just this whole cultural conflict involving language. It's like I would not have said I want language based science fiction, but it turns out that I do because it was amazing. I like artificial intelligence. I like all the things you can do with that. I loved ancillary justice, where you've got kind of a hive mind character
Yeah.
who has thousands of bodies. And she's super interesting. I loved that whole the character or the world building there. I love it when a world is just really thoroughly built out and they've put in all the little details. We're not seeing a zoomed out shot of, well, this is what things are kind of like, but like tiny little details, like the teacups. Teacups are so important in not in ancillary justice, but in some of the sequels, because they're handed down from generation to generation. And there's this whole thing. And why did they wear gloves? And like every detail supports the general vibe and the themes and the world building that has been built so far. I just love it.
Great fun. Yes. that's a rich tapestry to work from, and it sounds like you've done that yourself. So I'm really eager to read this book because I feel like, it's so I love pirates and I love pirate stories. And if I've there's a fantasy book that I've got on submission, my first epic fantasy, and I had to add some pirates, because obviously. So yeah,
Yes,
but
gotta have the pirates.
I kind of would love one day though to focus more on them instead of having them be supporting cast or of characters, right? There's just so much fun to be had. And my dad was in the Navy, and I
Yeah,
have an
mine too.
appreciation of sailing and things like that. So when you're a sailor's daughter, it just kind of, it kind of comes in the blood.
Yeah, it comes in. It has to.
Yeah. So you've got this wonderful book, and I'm curious, is there a sequel planned?
Yes, it is part of a trilogy,
Great.
um, which the publisher wants to publish the whole thing. I'm not exactly sure what the
Mm,
timeline is for when the next one comes out, but there is a next one. It's written, it's coming out. The third one's mostly done.
great.
Um, there's so much more world building that did not fit into the first book,
Yeah.
which will be unveiled as you go. We get trips to Venus and trips to Earth, so we can see
Outstanding.
kind of how my solar system works.
Love it. That's great news. Congrats.
Thanks.
3 books. I mean, I love a series, and I know a lot of readers do, so that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Now, what are you're currently working on the 3rd? Is there anything else you're working on, or are you focusing on that?
Oh boy. I have a lot of irons in the fire because I think revising the third book is the most important thing right now because I need to, get it ready. I'm actually committed to finishing it. But I've also written a couple more science fiction books that I want to figure out what to do with.
Great.
I think I may end up self publishing some. Uh, there's one that I think I will continue to pursue traditional publishing for, just trying to find a path for each of my books. I've also written a romance, which I have no idea how that fits into my career, but I just did it because it was National Novel Writing Month and I didn't have a world built. So I'm like, I guess I'll just set something in this world and see how that goes, which
Fine.
was definitely a new challenge for me. Had never written anything in this world before.
That's really cool. And do you think, because I've currently done this, I've separated out and now have new pen name. Jendia Gammon is
Hmm.
my pen name, and J. Diane Dotson was sort of like my indie publishing pen name. Now I've moved into traditional publishing. This will be mine going forward. But I know people who have 3 or 4 pen names, and some of them write sci-fi, historical fiction, and romance. I know
Hmm.
one gal who does all 3, different name for each one. So do you think that you would do that, or would you keep your name?
I don't know. I think it's more of a marketing decision, and I don't know enough about the marketing
Yeah,
yet. Like, I would like all of my readers to be able to find my other work, but I don't want to disappoint anybody either if they go buying a book thinking it's going to have a space adventure,
right.
and instead it's, love in a small town. I think there are definitely themes that run through all of my work. It is similar on many levels. We have a lot of queer people, we have a lot of neurodivergent people, we have, rebellion against authority. That's always going to be in there. But at the same time, you don't want to disappoint people by setting up an expectation. So I'll just have to, get some good advice on that and decide
Yeah.
what to do.
If I had to guess, I would say that, your readers, they're going to find your work no matter what name it's under, and they're going to respond to it. So, whatever you decide, there's no wrong answers, is my thinking. Because I
Okay.
know that this is going to be you'll be an appealing writer. These are appealing books with themes that matter, characters that you can care about. So I just fully encourage you that whatever you do, fully support, and again, I don't think there's a wrong answer. I do think sometimes it is a marketing decision. Because I've, sought out the advice myself, and that does seem to play into that. But, I don't think that, you look at though, Neil Gaiman and Stephen King write multiple genres under the same name. And I
Yeah.
considered that, but I made a decision for
Yeah.
different reasons in some ways. So
Hmm.
it's always up to you. And congrats for branching out, as I think that
Yeah.
makes us grow as writers to explore other genres.
I
Um,
think it really helps
I
because,
do. Yeah.
when I was writing the romance, I was like, well, I've got to do something to like fill in the fact that there's no action. And I think I got way better at describing things in the process because I'm like, okay, we need um we need to fill stuff up with, a delicious Christmas dinner and what are they eating at this dinner and what did it taste like? Or, oh, they're having this romantic scene in the forest. What's the forest look like? How does it feel? How does it smell? And especially because one of the narrators was an artist, so she's seeing the colors and things and she's like deeply having a sensory experience here. And that's something that I feel like science fiction especially, you really need because it can be easy to be like, okay, he's in a ship. It's gray. Outside it's black and there are stars. But it's like you don't feel that so much. I like it when you can feel it. And this is something the expanse does very well. It's like describing how it feels to be in zero G,
Yeah.
and the small things that are like annoying. Like at one point they mentioned you don't feel tired the same way in space because on Earth you feel tired, you feel gravity weighing you down. In space you don't feel that. Your eyes get burning and you're like, oh, I've been awake for 18 hours and I didn't
Mhm.
notice. Details like that. Just I think they really make it come alive. So
Yeah.
that's something I'm definitely learning to do.
That's outstanding. So your typical productive writing day when you're on, what does that look like? How does it roll?
Oh gosh, productive writing is for me is whenever the kids leave me alone. I've
Mother, I
got
get it.
4 of them, and they are
Sure.
a lot.
Yeah.
They are very they keep me busy. So it helps when they're at school. That's a good time for me
Right.
to write, and I see them off on the bus stop, and then I just get right to it. Because if I get distracted, I won't write, and go for an hour or two. I love National Novel Writing Month. It's always worked really well for me because as I'm drafting, I kind of need to get in the headspace where that's the only thing I'm doing. It's like tunnel vision, where I'm not reading anything else, I'm not watching any TV, I'm not spending very much time on social media. I'm writing or I'm thinking about writing or I'm doing the stuff I have to do to keep, life going. I don't have time for both writing and hobbies, so I just during the year I have hobbies and then in November and usually like most of December as well, I'm drafting and I just shut out everything that I can, let the house get a little messier and just plow through.
Smart.
Um, I'm not one of those people who can put up massive word counts in a day. I'm doing 3,000 words. That's a good day for me.
That's a really good day.
Um, but the rest of the time, like I'm mulling it over and I'm trying to work out plot problems because I do write an outline and then I always abandon the outline and do something different because the books have a mind of their own as they go and it's like,
They
oh, this
do.
is not going to work.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a really clever idea to focus during that 1 month and just absolute laser focus. And I have worked during NaNoWriMo, National
Mhm,
Novel Writing Month, before on a manuscript, but I didn't complete it. It was mostly done. I had done some before, I
mhm.
did some during, but it was a good exercise in just saying, okay, being accountable for this set
Yeah.
period of time, and that has a lot of power. And
Mhm.
it is easy to get distracted, but if you treat it like a job, and it is a job,
Yeah.
and you have your shift of writing,
Mhm.
it doesn't take away the joy of writing because that's what we love to do. So I think
Yeah.
that that's really a good call to encourage writers to try it, to try NaNoWriMo and see if you can
Mhm.
get, at least you don't have to finish the book, but maybe you can make significant headway.
Yeah.
You know, and then
And
you get a lot of
I'm
support.
very competitive.
There's that.
So
There's
I
the
have a writing group and we put our word counts at the end of the day.
ah,
And like,
yeah.
oh man, I will flake on so many responsibilities, but I can't not win. I can't not put up the numbers that everybody else is putting up. And
Yeah,
luckily my group is about the same level as me, so it's not a huge pressure. It's just like, no, I'm gonna have my numbers and I'm gonna win this thing and I'm gonna update every day. It
great.
it really helps.
Got it.
For some people, it's too much pressure, and I've seen people be like, "You know what? This does not work for me." But for me, it really does.
Yeah, and everybody has a different approach to it, and what works for you may not work for someone else. But for those writers who are looking for ideas to structure their time and to plan their time, it's very clever. And I always like to say more often than I'm competing with myself, but I love that little pressure, right? So, I was
Yeah.
also a science writer, and that I think like that deadline mentality sticks with me. I've always got that feeling of like I need to get this in. I've got
Yeah.
to get this in, and then if something derails that, I get really frustrated, but I like
Mhm.
your approach better because then you have squared off that time.
Mhm.
So very good idea. So what do you think? What would be your dream science fiction writing project, or are you doing that right now, or is there something like a big goal that you have
Yeah.
down the
Well,
line?
honestly, this is a dream. Like, I have put so much work into this universe. I think it is the most complete one that I have made. I might return to it as well. It's a completed trilogy. It's meant to be,
Right.
one single adventure across 3 books. But there's some backstory I'd like to write, so that might be a fun thing to do.
Very fun.
Um, I'd like to I'd like to have some more books with robots and aliens.
Oh, yeah.
I've got some ideas. Because this one,
Bring it
it's
on.
sadly devoid of robots and aliens. It's mostly people fighting people, but I really enjoy coming up with new kinds of aliens and the cultures that they would have based on their biology and how they function as a creature. Like, what culture would they build? What customs? How would they communicate? How would we struggle to communicate with them because they're so different from us? Just love all of that.
That's a lot of fun. Yes. So great. So you've got your current books, you've got this potential universe that you could dip back into. And I love all of that. And you mentioned robots, and I think now is the time to ask you this particular little question. What's the one thing that would tip people off to your being human or not? Let's say reverse Voight-Kampff from Blade Runner. First of all, let's go. How would people know that you're human?
Well, maybe I'm not.
We'll get to that. But what would be the one way that, yeah, you're human?
Well, I mean, let's see here. Like, how do I prove that I'm human to you?
Or, yeah, or to anyone, like,
I think
or to somebody
I
who knows
actually.
you and they would be like, is it really her? And what's the dead giveaway?
Oh, is it me specifically?
Yeah, you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Ooh. Well, if I'm accomplishing a whole lot in a day, it's not me. If I'm too efficient, if I remember all the things on my to-do list and I get it done, like check for a pulse, that ain't me. Um, I have a story that's still in my head, but the test in that for sentience, for sapience, if a robot doesn't do what you want, that's how you know it's real, right? Because the a robot that doesn't have its own will is always going to be trying to please you. But when it's got a life of its own, it doesn't want to please you. That's when it's a real person. And I think in the same way, I have my flaws, I have my faults. Those are how you'll know me. I think we'll develop more and more perfection in our artificial intelligence. But is that what we really want? What we
Right.
really want is to be loved by a person who is capable of not loving us. We want to communicate with a person who can say something we didn't previously think of, and that's a thing that no computer can do, at least not yet,
Yeah.
not until we figure out how to make them persons. And also, why would we want to do that? But that's
Yeah.
another
There's a whole lot of
question.
questions to dig into with that for sure. So in that regard, what would make people think that you might actually be a replicant, a robot?
Ah, um, maybe I'm just too perfect all the time. I don't know. Maybe I have way too many weird hobbies to be plausible. I do so many different things. I know so many random facts. I am one of those people who can hardly be stopped from info dumping about some random thing that I know about for no good reason. Like, somebody mentioned like textiles. I was like, oh, I have opinions about textiles, and let me tell you, and here's what I think. And
I
it's
love
like,
it.
why do you know so much about textiles? Well, I don't know. I just do.
That's awesome. I love it. So do you make your own? You weave, so
Yes. I
that's wonderful.
weave, I spin, I sew. I have made my own cosplay for this
I
book.
was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I have never done a project where I started with wool and ended up with like an outfit. I would like to do that someday, but it's just a massive quantity of work. But I've done like every step along the process,
Yeah.
and therefore I have strong opinions about what textiles are going to work for what project because I've handled them in every state. They feel very different.
That's its own aspect of world building, in my opinion. And I have strong opinions
Hmm.
in costume design, and I like to design my own costumes. And I rarely ever have them made, but I love to draw them and illustrate them. And try to figure out what kind of fabrics they
Yeah,
want
that's
to use.
that's very good because sometimes, like when I was making my cosplay, I discovered a lot of things about this outfit that I wouldn't have known to put in the book if I hadn't tried wearing it and be like, this is actually really bulky and hot.
Yeah.
That's an important thing to know. Because my main character Lucy is wearing a uniform, she's very proud of her uniform. She's obsessed with clothes. Uh, And so she's always trying to protect this uniform because the coat is wool. It's hard to wash wool.
Yes.
And her linen shirts are very white. She wants to keep them white. And there's a lot of work involved and a lot of thought involved. And she's always projecting her feelings about the military onto her uniform.
Hmm.
And as her uniform gets more tattered, so does her sense of her personal honor. So there's a lot of symbolic value there. But of course, I was also thinking, like, okay, so say Mars has been terraformed. What what kinds of textiles do they have? They don't have silk. They were not able to get silkworms over from Earth, but they have linen and they have wool and things that grow in a cooler climate because Mars is, further from the sun. I
Yeah.
always wanted to have like every bit of world building in there actually function. I don't want somebody to say, "But wait, how come they have cotton if it's not hot there?" Well, I have solutions for this. I have thought it through.
I love this. I love this a lot. Just on that personal kind of obsession with costume design, particularly in shows and movies, where I pay close attention. That is absolutely part of world building. And I think that a lot of genre authors don't really consider it. And I wish more did. So it's very exciting to talk to someone who does. And I love that a lot. So thank
Yeah,
you
my
for that.
first book that I ever wrote, I was 16 years old. And my friend read it. She's like, "You never once mentioned what anyone is wearing." And I was like, do people care about that? But I have come to the point where I really care about that. So now it's always in there. But there was a time when it's like, we could be heads talking in a void. They never get dressed, they never eat, you know?
Right. Great. So, all right. Now, what do you say is perhaps the worst writing advice you ever received?
Oh gosh, I will never forget this. I was in college, I was taking a creative writing class, and the teacher had written one picture book. That was her qualification for teaching this class. So I was a little skeptical. And she said, write the same scene. This is the good advice part. She said, write the same scene, the same setting, but the first time from the point of view of someone who is happy, and the second time from the point of view of someone who is sad. And that was really good assignment for me because I was like, you know what? The same exact things can be freighted with a different emotional weight
Yeah.
depending on, the words that you choose and the details you focus on. And I wrote this gorgeous thing. I mean, I thought it was good. And I said that it was cool out and breezy and whatever. And it came back all marked up. I got a C on it. And she's like, don't just say it's cool, say how many degrees. And don't say that the person was tall, say how many inches. I
Oh,
was like,
come on.
that's not how people think.
Yeah.
You wanted me to do this from the point of view of a character. This character does not have a ruler with him, and he does not have a thermometer. He has feelings. That's all he's got. So that is the worst advice. I think that
It's not
when
a
you're
measure-
describing something,
measurement.
you want to describe it from inside
Yeah.
someone's actual experience, how they would feel, and how you feel when you're outside on a hot day is not, well, I think it's probably about 92 with a heat index up to 94. No, it's not how you think.
Right. And if it doesn't, if in long form, use it only if it serves the plot, right? Like if
Right.
you need to know the
Mhm.
measurements, but by and
Or
large,
if
you don't.
your narrator is like a robot or somebody with a very technical attitude, if they're a scientist, maybe they're doing into their recorder, well, temperature is about 94 degrees, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, there are times when it fits, but you got to think who is having these experiences and how would
Really.
they
Yeah.
describe them?
Yes. And for different characters, it's going to be different experiences. So yeah, absolutely. So then for a writer who's starting out, what would be your best advice to them?
Ooh, there's so much. I think the most important thing is just to read a lot. We had a Twitter kerfluffle a couple years ago where it's like, is it ableist to say that you should read a lot? But I don't think that you can really have a good sense of what is possible, what has been done, what hasn't been done, unless you read a lot. And there's a lot of ways to read. You could block off a day and spend it in bed reading novels. You could read a little bit from time to time. Read short stories because they
Mhm.
have like a really condensed
Right.
language and description. They really do a lot in a short time. Audiobooks are great. I didn't used to be able to listen to audiobooks, but I've worked on it and I am now able to listen to them if I am simultaneously doing a chore and if it's like a really gripping one. with a good narrator. So I'm still picky about them, but I've overcome that because I think it's a really enjoyable way to make yourself do things like chores, and at the same time have that experience. So like I'm simultaneously cleaning this kitchen, and I'm also on the deck of a ship in the ocean with Captain Aubrey.
Yeah,
It's
pretty
fun to do it
cool.
that way.
Yeah, very cool. So, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like for readers to know, or where can they find you and your work?
Let's see. You can find me on my blog, SheilaJenné.com. You can find this book, all the usual places that books are sold. It's not in every bookstore, but it is on most of the big online bookstores.
Great.
It's on Barnes& Noble. It's on Amazon. It's in all the places. My publisher, Hanson House, they specialize in queer books, mostly science fiction and fantasy. So if you look up their website, which I think is hansonhousebooks.com, you can read. There are mermaid books. There's science fiction. There's some horror. There's
Great.
stuff that will probably appeal to a lot of people. I'm on Twitter at the moment, but Twitter is collapsing, so we'll see where I end up next. But all of the links for everywhere where I am are on my blog, so that's probably the best place.
All right. Well, Sheila, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm looking greatly forward to everything that you're bringing in into this universe of this lovely space pirates and whatever else you're choosing to publish down the line. So, thanks again.
Thank you. It's been a great chance to chat.
You're most welcome. Take care and write on.